You are listening or watching the Good Girl Podcast. My name is Cameo King. I am your host. There wasn't a space for women to be themselves in every facet of their lives. The Good Girl Podcast was created to offer that space, to have conversations with a gutted truth without restrictions. I invite you every single week to unpack your own set of questions and confessions in this good and safe space. Welcome back. If this is your, maybe couple times around the block listening to the Good Girl Podcast, or hello, if this is your first time listening to the podcast. This conversation that we're going to have today, I think will really shift your perspective on how you go about life, how you interact with your parent, with your mother, especially as a woman. So if you are a daughter, if you are a mother, if you plan on being a mother, this conversation is something that you need to be a part of, something that you need to engage in. And I love the fact that for this conversation, we have partnered with the Ingham County Health Department here in Lansing, Michigan, to really walk hand in hand, walk step in step with the community and navigate these conversations that impact our everyday lives, that impact the quality of life we will have and for generations to come. And so I hope you share this. I hope that you get a lot out of this. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start calling her my co-host. I'm going to go ahead and bring on Dr. Shoyinka. She is the Ingham County Medical Director. Welcome back.
Hi. It's always good to be here.
Always good to have you.
I hope your audience isn't tired of seeing my face.
They're not. You provide so much good information. And I want to hop right into this conversation because I think it's going to be healthy. I think it's going to be robust. And I just think it's necessary. And so this is a conversation about the impact that the relationship between a mother and daughter has on our health outcomes. And this is actually something I think as we were going through topics and as we were thinking about what does the community need to hear or what do they want to hear? And also my conversations with a couple of my friends. And this was a topic that bubbled up to the surface. And even as you and I were unpacking, I said, let's just get to the heart of it. Right.
Right.
And so the first question I have for you is, why is it so important? Why is the relationship between a mother and daughter important as it relates to my physical health?
So, you would think that to some extent it's obvious, you carried the baby, right? So it's, that would be the reason why. And actually, to some extent, in terms of, significantly, if you start from a baby, right? When a baby is formed and is growing in the womb, the mom is that environment where the baby grows, right? And so that environment is going to determine how well that baby does. As the baby is growing, not only is the baby growing, the baby is also developing, maturing, and parts are forming. If the environment isn't good, like I said, or something interrupts it, then it could affect that. So, and that concept, apart from the genetic piece of it, the environment is, a really good reason why. So that's baby to mom. As we grow older, as we take care of our children, baby comes out, we take care of our child, and, we live together, we do stuff together. Our lives, the way our situations are, affects, our children. But however, if you think about the genetic piece of things, when each of us get genes from both mother and father, and actually 50-50 is an equal thing, right? But part of some of the genes, the type of genes, so to speak, that come from the mother, particularly one type, the genes that make up our mitochondria, which is like the part of our cell that kind of generates energy. And that's almost in like every single cell of our body. All of our mitochondrial genes come from our mother.
Oh.
Now, that being said, That being said, that does not necessarily mean that it shapes everything going on in our lives. If there is some kind of mitochondrial disease, which is very rare, then, those kind of things would affect our health.
So quick question. I just want to so is this just for mothers to daughters or just mothers to children?
Mothers to children.
Okay.
Yeah. Every woman, the genes related to that part of our development is decoded, is determined, by our mother. That being said, the father contributes other things too. That's just an interesting piece.
I just want to highlight, I'm sorry, but I just want to highlight what you're saying, because that's huge, right? So when I asked the question, does the mother and daughter relationship affect or impact our health more than we know? Like on a very scientific level, how my cells work, how my cells work comes from my mother.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Society is here because of our mothers. Like how we show up.
Girl power. Listen, we're just we're the energy, Now what that means in terms of, how we, show up, so to speak, might not at a physical level, may or may not be as, obvious. I think that apart from what I just, referenced, I think the more important thing is how we live our lives. Not only do we determine how our children may or may not behave, of course we inherit some of those things. Behavior, see how I'm doing this, or, play with my ear, something like some of those habits are like, oh my God, your mom does that, or even passing down generations. And, likewise, it also shows up on the father side too, depending on what we're talking about. So those behaviors are shaped by our mothers. However, the more important thing is that our risk or our health outcomes based on our genetic component also come from that. And sometimes we could say, oh, my mom had this, and so, well, that's just how it runs in my family and we're done. But that's not the way to look at it. If we have that information, that's good information for us to look at our lives and see how we can do things differently. Because disease, genetics, our health, don't let me use disease. Our health is determined by one, genetics, our lifestyle, our environment, right? The things we eat, the habits we form. And so regardless of your genetic makeup, there are like 4 or 5 other components that you can use to influence that. You look like you were going to say something. So
it's a lot of things going through my mind, because I know we're talking about health, but and I don't know if we can really tangibly connect some of those things. So I think something that may be more common that we see when we think about genetics is, so maybe at a certain age, you start graying, or you gray early, or maybe your weight shifts in a certain way. And so we automatically say there's nothing I can do about it because that's just how my body is, but referencing what you said, also understanding, and I know you're talking about overall health, and I use maybe some more physical characteristics like hair and weight or things like that. But when I think about that, also connecting to, and I'm not a doctor. I didn't read stuff on the internet too. So when I say this, so take this with a grain of salt.
A dangerous place, the internet.
Take this with a grain of salt. But what I read is that a possible reason for your hair graying early is because of your diet. A reason for gaining weight or your weight shifting in a certain way is because of diet, instead of just writing that off to genetics.
So these are great examples, because you're right. It could be that you do have a genetic disposition to it. and then add the lifestyle, the environment, the things that you eat to it that naturally, regardless of your genetic makeup, would affect those things, then it makes it happen even faster.
Yeah.
Right? So obesity is a really good one. Some people are naturally heavier than others, but everybody, even the skinniest of people, if they eat a lot of calories and don't burn calories through, living not exercising and things like that, not having an active lifestyle, they will gain weight. Now, the rates might be different based on genetics, but those environmental factors are still there. So I dare say that the things that we can control, those environmental factors, are things that we should be paying a lot of attention to. Our genetics help us understand which ones of those environmental factors should we focus on to help counter some of the genetic stuff too, or at least minimize that. And I say that in a way that I don't want to make it sound like as if our genetics are bad, you know what I mean? But it's just like you see what you should know. It's the same thing like a mother or a father, a parent would tell their kids, like, I know what I'm talking about. Like, I did this when I was a fool when I was 17. Like, if you do this, you are going to, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So it's kind of the same thing. And it doesn't have to be, don't be a fool. It can just be, you might want to consider it this way. So.
Yeah. Is this the reason? So again, having these conversations kind of behind the scenes, listening to my listeners, also listening to my friends. A friend of mine asked a very pointed question. Fly Carla, that's her name. She said, "What's the reason? Why do they always ask me as a woman when I go to the doctor about my mother's history, and they don't ask me about my father's history or the father side of my family? They always ask me about my mother's. Is that because of the because we power the body because of the mitochondria?"
So I think it depends on what the doctor is looking for. When you go to the doctor and you're meeting your doctor for the first time, or you're going somewhere for the first time, they will ask for family history on both sides, father and mother. But again, it depends on what disease we're trying to focus on. If we're thinking about, hypertension, a history of smoke, a heart attack, things like that, both sides, could be significant, diabetes, things like that. Regardless, it doesn't really matter whether it's, you just have that genetic disposition. And I guess depending on, our genetic makeup would determine how much more it's significant. And then, sometimes you even want to think about, they ask you questions about in your family, like, is it on your maternal grandmother? When you say, well, my maternal grandmother had a stroke. So is it in my maternal or my just for that history piece. But then when they're asking you specifically about your mother, there are specific things that we want to hear about. Breast cancer, uterine cancer, ovarian cancer are things that if your mother, your immediate mother, had any of those things, then we start talking about a higher risk. They're going to say you should start doing a mammogram earlier. If you have siblings, like sisters, who also had it, then you want to start. They're going to talk to you about doing a mammogram earlier. If you had like a second generation, or like a cousin who had breast cancer, then we look at the risk slightly differently too, depending on what generation and how far removed it is. But those kind of things, they're particular conditions, and I'm emphasizing that breast, uterine, and ovarian, because I know we've all heard about the BRCA gene, right? And that is predominantly transmitted, from mother to child. Now, that does not mean that men don't have.
So explain the BRCA gene for us.
So the BRCA gene is the gene mutation that could predispose to any of those cancers that I mentioned, breast, ovarian, and uterine predominantly. Now, again, that is the gene that is identified in people who have it. Not everybody who has breast cancer has that BRCA gene. There is, right? And that's where we come to this whole environment conversation too, again.
Yeah.
Overall, not everyone who has breast cancer has the BRCA gene. And so environment, and things like that could also contribute it. But when you think about that question in a doctor's office, the reason is because they want to be able to identify the preventive screening measures that they want to take early, so that we don't get to a place where we're talking about actual cancer and we're addressing risk factors for prevention.
Yeah. So the other direction I want to take this conversation, but it naturally leads into it, is even the conversations you have between the mother and the daughter, and knowing what and knowing the things that they faced, knowing how they faced them physically, emotionally, spiritually. And I know there's a characteristic among Black women, especially Black mothers, to simply not to share with their children, right? And it's out of protection.
Yeah.
Because I don't want you to worry, right? And so we're not going to have this conversation until, say, it's done and over with, or until I really have to have this conversation with you. Can you tell me why that's problematic?
So for a lot of reasons. So, you did say that one of the reasons why we don't share with our children is, one, it could be shame. It could be, we're also, a lot of people of color across cultures now, not just African American women, people from Africa, from Asia. Culturally, we don't talk about the bad things. We don't talk about, it's like, shh, don't say that, right? We don't air it out. We don't air out our dirty laundry, even amongst us. So even my kid is supposed to think it should not speak bad or think bad about me. You know what I mean? So that it's harmful.
And I want to, before you really get into this, you said it's harmful, but I also want to throw the faith community in there, right? Because we're very much taught, there are stories where people say, I'm not going to confess this, I'm not going to receive this, and I get it. I get it. But it's
so, and I'm kind of glad you brought that up. Let's go there. Faith without works is nothing, right? If you have faith in something, your faith propels some kind of action. Or faith can operate at different levels. And I'm not here to preach, but faith operates at different levels, right? When you believe in something, when you believe something is going to happen, it could mean, I believe that I can pick up this phone because, I know that I can. I believe that I can run a marathon, but you're going to have to pick up the phone, right? You have to apply some level of action, right? Or you're going to have to put on your sneakers and start practicing because you believe it. And so we apply the same thing in this context too. Faith requires some corresponding action, right? And when you don't, then you miss out on the power that is in what you believe in. And so going back to talking about specific sharing information and sharing that stuff, again, you could actually say it's part of that faith journey too.
Yeah.
Because you are now saying, this must not happen in my bloodline. That's how we say it in, like in, the generations after me. What is your faith action to that? Keeping quiet and keeping the next generation in the dark about that is not faith. It's actually fear. And so that's why it's important, because I can now look back. This is not for your child to look at you and say, oh, my mom had a lot of, baggage or whatever. No, it's just like, okay, this is something that I should be on the lookout for, right? It's just like you tell your kid, look right, look left, and then look left again before you cross the street. That's how I always did it. That's, and that's what's going to save your life. So that's the concept. That's the thinking behind it. And it can be really, really powerful because, you could develop lifelong habits that redirect things that happen. It's the same way in behavior, so to speak, or, you have a kid who is going to play some kind of sports, you sharing your experience does not necessarily mean that child shouldn't do whatever you're telling them to do, but it gives some level of insight and helps them to kind of make decisions, especially if they're experiencing something in their body. And it's like, I should pay more attention to this because I've also heard that, this happens. So behaviors like smoking, like alcohol, we talked earlier about how alcohol, there's a genetic link to alcoholism, right? But then we also talked about the nature versus nurture piece, right? So even though I have a natural tendency to alcoholism, because I've seen that pattern through previous generations, I can take measures. I can find the help that I need, therapy, whatever it is, stay away from, nope, sorry, I just don't drink after 6 o'clock, whatever those behaviors are. Or I need to find something else that, satisfies me in lieu of alcohol, because I know that if I do that, I'm more likely to, do that. And there's so many other examples.
Yeah, I have a friend, and again, I think about how the dynamics of certain families function, that we just don't talk about things. So where you may know that aunt so and so drinks a lot, or uncle so and so drinks a lot, or that is their therapy, is drinking. But I know how she operates, right? She says, I intentionally do not drink because I know this runs at my family, but no one in their family ever talked about it. It's just more so something that she observed. And she says, I don't even want to take one sip because I've seen its destruction.
Right. So the other important thing is that one thing we want is, yes, sometimes we draw conclusions. Again, remember, we talked about, when I talk about the genetic predisposition, yes, it could be like auntie, uncle, but it's really more, mother, father, in terms of when we refer to alcohol. But then, again, once it starts like mother, father, and then auntie, uncle, like their family, right? So, you might be seeing the manifestation from a different end. But one thing I do want to emphasize is that even if your parents aren't talking about it, we're in a day and age where, especially as you get older, when I was younger, there were some things I couldn't ask my mom because she'd be like, oh, shoot. But, as I grew older, I was like, lady, listen, we need to talk about it. I was bolder. I was more mature, and then I could, address even things that hurt, things that, I never really understood. So anyway, what I want to admonition everyone is that just because they're not because they're not coming up with it, doesn't mean that you shouldn't respectfully ask. That's be bold enough to say, hey, I just noticed this. Like, give me some family history. Sometimes family history hurts, but there are good components to it. And just by hearing stories, whatever, it might help. And then you can say, how did you do this? Where do you think, this happened? Where did you go wrong? And what did you do right? How did it start? And you'd be surprised how some people, depending on your relationship, will be willing to share.
And I also think about, I know we're in this space of conversations and the impact of conversations and how they can really change the trajectory of someone's health, or just getting a better understanding of how my body functions. I just think about historically, about the history of Black people in medicine, the history of Black people in healthcare systems, and the reason why we got to where we are. Again, talking to my mom about this topic, I said, what did grandma, her mother, tell you about health in your body. And she told me, she said, the only thing she told me, she told me two things. She said, one, always wear clean underwear because you may get in an accident. I feel like that's what every Black parent, I feel like.
Listen, it is vital information.
Always. My mama told me,
all day long. Like, it is critical. Like, the most important thing when you have an accident is how clean your panties are. Yes.
Why is that the reason why I should wear clean underwear? Because but anyway. But then she also said that my grandmother told her to listen to her body. But she said that has been the thing that has really shifted her health. But she didn't talk to her even about the mechanics of like your menstrual cycle and maybe this will happen then and just she even went on. She was she encouraged me actually to do a show about sex because she said my mother never talked to me about that. And even when she got married, she said a lot of stuff was completely foreign to her because she didn't know and she didn't understand.
We as parents are afraid that if we share that information, that we're exposing our children to stuff. And then how do you how do you explain it? It's uncomfortable, but we're learning more and more, just quickly touching on that, sexual health conversation, knowledge is always power. And as you share in an age appropriate way, I mean, you can start talking about, sexual health to, a 7-8-year-old, depending on the context with which you share it. So, I mean, I would encourage you to, encourage our listeners to, have a script, like think it through, like, not like I need to have this whole conversation right now. Make it a ongoing conversation. Once in a while, throw that in there and because if you're like, I'm going to do the talk, then it becomes weird. Nobody's listening. And then I remember one of my friends said, I just got to share this really quick. Like, he said his mom was like, okay, I need to talk to you, whatever. And as she started, they're like, what is it? And she starts telling them, they figure out, okay, it's sex. And she's like, Mom, don't worry. Like, we know all of this. And their mom actually went, oh, thank God, and got up.
She's like, right now, I gotta do this first.
I don't have to do it. Yeah. It's like, so.
And also, and I think sometimes, well, I'll say this. I was surprised at when they do ask the questions. And it's typically not a convenient time. One of my godchildren, I was on the way to the store, right? To get some cupcakes for her brother's birthday party. And she wanted to come with me. And she's just asked some questions. She's like, are you married? I said, no, I'm not married. And then she asked me, like, are me and my brother married? No, because that's how she associates, like, people. Right. I'm like, no. And then she was like, do you have any kids? No, I don't know. I don't know where all these questions came from. And then she says, where do babies come from? And I'm like,
alert. Yep. Because if you're not, you will miss those opportunities. So, thinking about it ahead of time is definitely helpful, because then you're kind of ready. Because no matter what, it's going to hit you like a ton of bricks regardless. You might be speechless for a little bit, but then if you're prepared and you've kind of looked into it, then you're better prepared. And like I said, even if you miss that opportunity the first time, remember, it's not a talk. It's an ongoing conversation that, through as they grow older, you continue to have that conversation. So that's the way to think about it. Overall. And that's everything, sex, health, all of that, just little things, just by virtue, when I was younger, I did this. Those are the kind of things that we want to share. And then likewise, to the older generation, in those, random conversations too. Yeah. It shouldn't be the talk too. It should be, just throw it in there. And eventually you'll be surprised at what you learn.
And I love the encouragement to make this a part of what we do on the regular, that it what isn't just, I mean, you may have to sit your mother down, you may have to sit your parent down and say, we need to have these conversations. I need to know what you dealt with at what age, so you can kind of understand what's normal and what's not normal.
Right.
But even I think about, the fact that what we eat, like we are what we eat. And so we become our body. And I think about a lot of the pervasive diseases that are within certain communities and where we like to commune. So over Thanksgiving, when, Auntie so-and-so was dumping all that sugar in them yams, you like, let's
modify that recipe.
Just a little bit. We don't need, but I think that's when you can begin to have
Right.
conversations, and therefore they are ongoing. Also, so there's not a lot of pressure, and you don't feel attacked, or you don't feel like put on the
Because
spot.
it gets weird. Yeah. And then it becomes easier.
Yeah.
Right. Because you've kind of opened this thing up, and then we're not as hung up about those secrets in quotes. Yeah. It's foreign to our culture. Remember, when we go back in ages, again, culturally, everything is about, a lot of things are about appearances.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of things are about, in culture, we just don't say it. So we need to shift that culture, one for ourselves and for the generations behind us.
Yeah. And so last question, and the question I always like to ask, what is in my control that I can do now that will help me in terms of my health, and I will also help my mother, and also help potentially future generations?
From a health standpoint, understanding your risk factors for disease, those basic things, diabetes, hypertension, things like that are really important. Just knowing what happens in family, and then knowing the things that you can, address, because then you know where to start from. I think that's the first, that's where you have control, right? Because if you hear about it, then you can do something about it, as opposed to, because there might be some things that we don't even know, right? Or that you don't, pay attention to. So in terms of our control, I think that's the best thing. And when we do know, then we take action. If we don't take action, then again, we're back to that thing. So one, for me, find out what's important to me, right? For me, for the generations after me, what is in my control is to change that trajectory of us not telling the next generation about things that are important. And so sharing that information as part of the conversation. And then for the generations who were before us, we want to ask questions in a loving and respectful manner, knowing that, you can't dump any blame on your genetics, because the other factors are very, very strong in terms of that difference. The environment, your lifestyle are critical pieces that, they could totally upend the genetics in those when we talk about those conditions.
Awesome. Well, as always, it's been a pleasure, Dr. Shoyinka. And thank you for being on the Good Girl podcast.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.